Welcome to the Fantasy Throwdown Podcast. The Fantasy Throwdown Podcast. Bringing you the latest from the world of daily fantasy sports and gambling, so you can stop Googling how to join a squid game to cover all those parlays you thought were such a sure thing. Now, sit back and listen to one of the sharpest minds in the game. Here's your host, Dwayne Callender.
Hello and welcome to the show, everyone. We have hockey on tap. I know some of you are wondering, really? We're going to talk about hockey? Absolutely, because the best time of the year has arrived in sports. I know people are wondering, like, really? Yes. You know why? Because the Stanley Cup Playoffs are my favorite playoffs, even though it is outside of maybe the World Cup. But, you know, that's only once every 4 years. Hopefully it stays once every 4 years. But the Stanley Cup playoffs typically are the hardest fought playoff series, the most high-level execution playoff format of any of the major sports. Because everyone grinds and actually earns it over multiple 7-game series. However, this is the first true NHL playoffs in over 4 years. It was a full 82-game season for the NHL. No neutral sites coming up. You got full capacity for fans. You know, it's basically we're back. We're actually back. For the first time in since 2018, we are actually back in a true standard NHL format for the playoffs. And, you know, I got to go through a couple of things about the regular season, because folks are looking at these teams and saying who's going to win based off of how the regular season played out. I hate to break it to you folks, but the scoring in the NHL regular season was absurd because of a number of factors, namely which you had top goal scorers putting up numbers we haven't seen in years, and teams basically committing to, we're going to have offensive defensemen be a priority for us. We're not going to go too crazy. I'll get to that in a moment. But scoring was at its highest period in 26 years. That means, yes, we are literally talking about mid-90s scoring back in the NHL. The average goal per NHL game this year was 6.3. We haven't had that since the heyday of Hockey Town with the Red Wings in the mid-90s. You had at least 8 players break 100 points, and you had 50 players score 30 or more goals. I mean, the Rangers had a ton of goal scorers, and yet still, the Rangers aren't even close to the top of the scoring ranks across the league. That shows you just how scoring centric the league was this year. And I still have to be honest. This is still going to be a case where I think the format is going to be very different for the playoffs. I'm just going to be honest with you guys. I think teams are going to tighten up way more, and it's going to have some severe impact for a couple of these clubs that are used to scoring in bunches. So we're going to see. We're going to see, but we're going to dive into these games here, because I think we got some interesting first round matchups that I don't think folks are necessarily paying that close attention to, that they really should, in terms of the odds and really my expectation of how some of the series will play out. But across the board, the scoring has been up in the league. I just don't think that you can take this, that it's going to carry over straight into the playoffs. We've seen this constantly. The ice shrinks. It's going to be harder to get those clean looks on net, and you're going to need goaltending if you want to go further in the playoffs. But the Florida Panthers are your President Cup trophy winners. They had the best record in the regular season. They're loaded with talent. We saw it last year, as they pushed Tampa. I thought last year they were a year early, and this worked out to be the breakout year. They came along even stronger than I thought. Jonathan Huberdeau had, I believe it was close to 100 plus points, in terms of, but, this is where you have the caveat, because the Eastern Conference was so bad this year. Every single team that made the playoffs had over 100 points. It wasn't even close. The Islanders were the next closest non-playoff team with 85. Or like 80, maybe they finished with 88. But like that being said, like everyone in the East was bad. There were a lot of bad teams in the East. I mean, the Columbus Philly trade went absolutely nowhere, as I said it would. Just terrible teams. The Devils still have no idea what they're doing. The East was bad, really bad. But yeah, every team was over 100 points. So, the Panthers had 122 points on the regular season, but they're not playing any slouches in the Washington Capitals. Caps are the Caps. They still got Ovechkin, who had yet another ridiculous season where, you're wondering how the hell Ovi keeps up putting up all these goals when he's supposed to be declining with his slap shot with age. It's not happening yet. He's still scoring on a tear, and with the open ice this year, it just made it even easier for him to rack up over 800. He ended up surpassing the 800 career goal tally mark. You passed up a number of individuals en route to yet another monster year. Now, the question here is, how healthy is Ovi? Because he did injure his shoulder late in the year. So even with the 50 goals scored, there's still some question mark as to how healthy he's going to be. The issue for the Caps, though, is their goaltending, because Vikanen, I'm going to butcher some of these names, but just in terms of, I'm saying Vikanen, I'm saying Vanasek. But Vanasek and Samsonov, they were both equally bad in net, and you're going up against one of the highest scoring teams in the league. I just look at this as a case where I see the Caps going down pretty quickly. I don't see them. Actually, I think the Panthers were the highest scoring team in the league. I'll have to double check their numbers against Colorado, but I'm pretty confident that between some of these other squads that Florida did lead the league in scoring this year. But it's just, to me, this one's one of the more obvious mismatches just because of how bad Washington's goaltending. Maybe they get hot, but I don't necessarily see it happening with the way the Caps played throughout most of the year. Their goaltending just never got to a good place overall to feel confident in a playoff series. And of course, they drew the worst matchup by not winning down the stretch, because it's just, realistically, the Panthers are the worst matchup Washington could have gotten. Washington is the perfect matchup for the Panthers, in my opinion, because, yes, while there's Ovi, the offensive threats on the Panthers should be able to generate more than enough pressure to kind of get by this series. I look at the Panthers in 5. In terms of the series line odds, they had the Panthers at -1.5, was -150 for the Panthers, -2.5, which basically tells you Panthers need to win in 5 or less. That was +150. Either way, I am good with taking the Panthers -1.5. Or if you want to go be a little bit bolder and where I was leaning, Panthers in 5 or less, you can go with the -2.5 and you get +150. That's how I would look to bet this series. I just look at this as a case where I think Washington is outgunned and there's really not much they can do about it. It is what it is, especially if Ovi isn't 100%. If he's not 100%, they were already behind the 8 ball here. I just think it sinks them even further. Over in the Western Conference, we have the Colorado Avalanche as the overall number 1 seed, playing the Nashville Predators. Predators back in the postseason, although in a much weakened position, just because of the fact that I kind of view this matchup as, again, somebody had to make it in the wild card spot. Basically, you had the Canucks, Vancouver Canucks, and the Vegas Golden Knights were just, way too inconsistent throughout the year, and try to mount and rally late, but just not enough. And, slow and steady Canucks, slow and steady Predators just kind of got in, even though I don't think anyone would confuse them with being a top flight team. I look at this series and say, this really comes down to, can Colorado not look past Nashville? Because as good as Roman Josi is, it's literally Roman Josi, the all-star defender for Nashville, trying to play 28 to 30 minutes a night to keep this series close. I don't see Nashville winning more than a game in this series. I think this is the most clear-cut mismatch. And UC Saros, the starting goaltender for the Predators, also rolled his ankle and had a pretty nasty-looking ankle injury in the last 2 weeks of the year. His status is still in question for a couple of games this series. I'm not exactly sure, again, on the Nashville side, where are we actually getting to a good spot? Because I'm not entirely convinced that Nashville, isn't in the camp of trying to tread water and just keep this series from. And again, I'm not trying to discount, because Nashville somehow won 45 games this year, so it's not as though they're a complete pushover. The question, the issue becomes on the Nashville side. They weren't exactly that stellar defensively. They actually did score more goals than the Rangers. So again, when I complain about the Rangers not being too top heavy and not having enough goal scoring throughout the lineup, I actually mean it. Even Nashville scored more goals than the Rangers. The issue for Nashville, though, is they do give up quite a few goals, and without Saros in net, their goaltending was still pretty spotty overall from a backup standpoint. So it kind of came down to what else are they going to be able to do? Because I don't necessarily see a good outcome here. Rittich was pretty mediocre overall when he did start in net for Nashville. I mean that's it. I don't think they have anybody else in net that they can throw in there. It's just the case where Rittich couldn't get it done in Calgary. For the couple of years he played there, wasn't very good in the postseason either. I just have my doubts. There's a reason why Calgary gave up on him, because they couldn't. They just, even with the carousel Calgary had before they pulled off the Markstrom heist. It's just it's pretty clear cut. I just think that this series probably should end in a sweep, but I'm gonna give Nashville a game because they won more games than anyone could have given them credit for. I still can't get over how Nashville won 45 games this year, because if you look at this roster, it's a lot of guys who are probably nearing the tail end of their career or already at the tail end of their career. Ryan Johansson never really reached the heights that people expected him to for his career. You know, he's already 10 years into his career. He's just, you know, people always thought he was going to be a 70 to 80 point centerman. He's just a 60-point guy. Like, that's the weird part about Ryan Johansson. Like, everyone thought he was going to take off, and it just never happened. I think, you know, I just think this is one of those where it's like, you kind of accept it for what it is. This ain't a system thing. This just, player just wasn't as good as we thought he was. You know, Granlund, again, another case where centerman, you know, you had a number of years throughout the ranks. And that's why I always say, well, like with hockey, development happens slower, but at a certain point, you realize that guys really are just what they are. Like Granlund, again, another case. Centerman, you always thought there was another gear he had when he was in Minnesota for so many years. You know, another 10 years in the league. He is what he is. He's like a 60-point centerman. Like, you know, it's fine. That gets you into the playoffs. It's just, I don't see really a threat. Like, this team just does just this team just screams just good enough to get there. And it's like, I would take these guys as my number 3 centerman. The problem is you kind of need you need more than that. And again, Matt Duchene, you know, a number of years in Colorado. Technically, this would be considered his breakout year, where he had 43 goals and 43 assists. Like, he's the reason why they actually got into the postseason, in my opinion. And, you know, 86 points on the year. But this is like the primary threat for Nashville is Matt Duchene. And again, you would think it's Forsberg, but Forsberg, you know, yeah, he had 42 goals, but it's like everyone was scoring in budget. Like, this is why I say it's like, this is one of those weird years where even for top guys, if you didn't hit 50, it's almost like, and you're supposed to be the top goal scorer, it's almost one of those where it's like, you kind of like scratch your head because you're like, well, I mean, he only hit 40. It's like, 40 is a great year. And yet still, it's kind of crazy that we're in this spot scoring-wise that, you know, so many teams put up big numbers that you almost have to, like, kind of acknowledge the fact that, you know, you may not get that much of a lift. And I'm going to circle back with the Rangers. Like, it's one of the most bizarre years where Panarin is the primary threat on the Rangers, yet he did not score that ton of goals. He just set everyone else up for success. And we'll see if he gets a little bit more aggressive come postseason. But yeah, it's a weird mix for this Nashville team. I think Colorado closes them out in 5. I think McKinnon, Rantanen, Landeskog. I just think they just throw waves at Nashville and break them because they don't have the goaltending. If you keep putting shots on net, they're going to crack at Nashville a couple of times, and I just don't see Nashville really scoring. So in terms of the series props, I'm definitely hammering the Colorado -1.5. Obviously, you're going to be paying some of the vig with that one, but it's not as though it's too egregious. It's -260 for the -1.5 spread, and then the -110 for the 2.5 games. So in 5 or less, you know, that's what Vegas is expecting too. But, you know, I just don't think it's wrong. I just think it's a fair assessment. So next up, we're going to go to the series that people keep talking about. And I just think Vegas has this wrong. I think the experts have this wrong. Somehow, the Toronto Maple Leafs, who have flamed out spectacularly in the first round every year for the last 6 years, we're going to take the Maple Leafs as favorites against the two-time defending Stanley Cup champions, Tampa Bay Lightning. Toronto is minus 120 for the series to beat Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay's healthy. Tampa Bay's coasted throughout this entire year. So for everyone saying that, Tampa looks a step off, they were coasting. They're trying to go for a three-peat. They are coasting. I hope people understand, like, when you're going for the three-peat in any major sport, that third year, the regular season means nothing. I hope people understand this. Tampa Bay did just enough. They knew well in advance that, the East was pretty much a lock to make the playoffs. And they didn't push. They didn't push for seeding because they know how to beat all these teams. So, yes, while they are locked into a matchup against Tampa, they were going to be locked into a matchup against Florida regardless. This is why the NHL has the worst format in professional sports. Because from months ago, even if you had the overall number one seed, you were stuck in a matchup with more than likely either Toronto or Florida. You weren't getting past your own division because you're stuck playing your own division. That's why this bracket format sucks. It sucks because you always put in your division rival for the next round, no matter whom you play in the first round. So you're always playing them a round too early. There's no reason why Florida should be playing either Toronto or Tampa in the next round. So, seeding-wise, if they actually did this properly, Florida would probably be playing the winner of the Rangers Pittsburgh series. That's the way it should actually work. But no, we have this format. So, yes, I'm looking past Toronto, but I'm just being perfectly honest here. This is one of the worst prices I've seen. I have been hammering Tampa even money throughout. I think Tampa wins this series either in 5 or 6 games. I just think they turn it up on Toronto, and I don't think Toronto really has a good answer for what Tampa's going to throw at them. I really don't, because I think as well as Austin Matthews has played this year, and yes, they have John Tavares, they have Nylander, they have Marner. Don't get me wrong, Toronto has offensive talent. What they don't have is Andrei Vasilevsky, the best goaltender in the NHL. As good as Igor Shesterkin is for the Rangers, Vasilevsky is still the number one goaltender in the league. How is the team with the best goaltender in the league the underdog in a series? Even with the offensive weapons on Toronto, Tampa has just as many offensive counters. You still have Point. You still have Stamkos. You still have Kucherov. I mean, we can talk about Victor Hedman. We can talk about the defensemen on the Lightning who also create offense. But the reality of the situation is Tampa has Vasilevsky. And while Jack Campbell's been good, he ain't Vasilevsky level yet. Let's be honest with ourselves here. So to me, the Toronto pricing, expecting Toronto to be the favorite against Tampa, I just think it's the worst pricing of the playoffs. I think it's foolish not to be betting on Tampa Bay to win. I know people want. I know Canada, like the Canadian fans and the Maple Leafs fans, are saying this is their year. I just think it's kind of delusional. I'll be perfectly honest. I'm listening to the commentary. I know everyone thinks how close the series is going to be. I don't think it's going to be that close. Maybe Toronto surprises me here, but I think they get punched in the mouth early. I think they get punched in the mouth pretty hard by Tampa. I think, this first game is going to be important. If Toronto can avoid getting smacked hard with like a large goal deficit loss, maybe Toronto holds their own. But I just think Tampa comes out to blitz them. I think if they blitz Toronto early in this series, Toronto probably rolls over. I just look at it as like, and it'll be a here we go again situation. I think Tampa comes out hard against Toronto. I think they put up a bunch of goals, and I don't think Toronto necessarily responds well to it, because to me, the biggest issue with Toronto that I see is the nerves. I think it's a lot of it's mental. I don't think they play their best in the postseason, but this is the worst matchup they could have gotten in the first round. Because I think Toronto, if they, again, this is why I hate this format, because I think if Toronto matched up against the Rangers, I think I still would like the Rangers over Toronto because of Shesterkin, but I think that's a far more fair series for Toronto. I think if you match Toronto against Carolina, I think they have a decent shot, even though they points wise they couldn't match up against Carolina. But it's like, if you gave Toronto the Rangers, or if you gave Toronto the Penguins, I think those are two fairer matchups for Toronto than playing Tampa Bay. I definitely wouldn't want the Rangers playing Tampa Bay. So it's better as a Rangers fan for me personally seeing Toronto play Tampa. But I just think this is one where people have gotten this completely wrong. I think this should be Tampa favored. I think Toronto's the one with all the pressure on it. Yes, Tampa's going for the three-peat, but, it's a case where I think Tampa is now they're ready to start hitting the postseason hard. I think they were coasting through the regular season throughout, and they were more than comfortable letting Florida grab all the points and punditry of how good the Panthers are. I think Tampa is just ready to get their actual season started. And yeah, I'll take my L's if it comes down to it with Austin Matthews like having a massive series. I mean, Matthews, was terrific this year, but I got to see in the postseason. These guys have not shown up, and I know what I'm getting in Tampa. So to me, the onus is actually on Toronto to show up for this series, because this is actually the hardest opponent they've ever faced in the postseason before. And people are actually picking them to win. I just think it's mind blowing. Just truth be told, I just think it's mind blowing that Toronto is facing their toughest opponent in years. It's crazy. I don't know what else to say. I just think it's wild that all these years, Toronto's been losing to the likes of Boston, and we're going to take them against Tampa Bay. Okay. Next up, we're in the West. We've got the overall number 2 seed in Calgary playing Dallas. And this is one of those weird ones, because I talked about the Markstrom heist. All these years, Calgary scoring tons of goals and getting bounced, either in the first round or just not making the playoffs at all. They finally got a team around Johnny Gaudreau where you have goaltending in Markstrom. They got him from the Canucks, whom the Canucks just being one of the worst run NHL franchises around. They got Markstrom in a way they should never have been able to get a top 8 goaltender. And Calgary got him, and Markstrom has played like a top 4 goaltender. Markstrom's just been that good this year that he should be up for consideration for the Vezina. I just think that he's just been that good in net this year, and this is kind of one of those awkward series because Dallas doesn't score goals. I think Dallas is the lowest scoring goal team of the playoffs, and comparatively to the rest of the league, I think Dallas is actually bottom 5 in goals scored per game. They score less than 3 goals per game, and I already told you, average NHL game this year averaged 6.3 goals. So that should tell you how low scoring Dallas is. And Dallas, goal scoring wise, is more comparable to the bottom half of the Eastern Conference teams that didn't make the playoffs. But what Dallas does do, they play their defensive shell. They try to make life as difficult for you as possible and try to win their games 2-1, 3-2, and just grind out games in that fashion. Like they're just not going to try to score with you. And this is where it comes to this clash of styles, because realistically, I kind of look at this as a case where Calgary should win this series. They're heavy favorites to win the series, but I could see also Calgary getting into their bad habits of taking bad penalties, getting into the penalty box, and Dallas figuring out a way of staying in the series, because as low scoring as Dallas is overall, their power play is actually pretty decent. They'll convert. They convert over 20% of the time on the power play. That's how they kind of generate their offense. In terms of teams that are power play dependent, they're closer to the Rangers than most of these playoff teams are. They really need the power play in order to generate their offense in bulk of the scoring. So I'm curious to see how Calgary matches up here. I think Calgary takes this one in 6, but I do think Dallas is due to make life as difficult as possible for Calgary, just from the standpoint of I don't necessarily think that you'll have that great of a matchup in terms of scoring wise. I think it's going to come down to just the line of that's going to have to generate the offense for Dallas. If Pavelski, Rupe Hintz, and Jason Robertson can get on track and put up points on Markstrom, that's the only win condition that I see out of Dallas. They actually need to just score with that one line, and most likely it'll be off the power play. I don't see much else coming in terms of this team. Jake Ottinger, it's going to be his first playoffs. He's going to have to try to steal a game off of Markstrom. Again, it's going to be a tall order for Dallas. I feel confident in Calgary advancing here. It's just a matter of how many games can Dallas extend the series by, because, if we're looking matchup wise, this is almost the steepest mismatch on paper here. We're gonna look at Carolina and Boston. This is one of the most interesting series, in my opinion, here, because Carolina, one of the Cup favorites entering the year, Cup favorites throughout the year, and they're playing a team that does everything they like to do and has a little bit more veteran savvy in the Boston Bruins. You have the perfection line of Marchand, Pastrnak, and Bergeron. Bergeron still plays at a high level defensively at center. You've got two teams with very active defensemen. They're going to jump in the zone. They're going to clog things up. This is just like a very balanced series. I think that, to me, this is the series that's most likely to go to 7 games. Carolina had a great year, but Freddie Anderson, the starting goaltender for Carolina, got hurt, and it's a question of whether or not Carolina can survive long enough. Because I think if Boston gets up in this series, it's a lot of here we go again, because Boston has knocked out Carolina of the playoffs 2 of the last 3 years. These teams know each other very well. I'm looking at this I know Carolina has more talent. Sebastian Aho and Teuvo Teravainen, they're coming into their own, And now, skill-wise, before you used to make the argument that between Pastrnak and Marchand, they're the better squad. Now, with Teravainen and Aho getting better, and as Pasta and Marchand get older, I don't think it's that clear-cut anymore. I think this is really going to come down to goaltending, and we got a question mark at Jeremy Swayman. First postseason, really. No Tuukka Rask anymore. Boston has their own questions, too. I just look to see how these teams adjust, because I think this is a 7-game series. I really believe that this is the first 7-game series that we feel pretty confident in. It's going 7. I don't see either one of these teams being able to close out the other in 6. I think this one goes 7. I'm still not entirely convinced that it's Carolina series to lose. I think it's pretty even. I'm actually going to take Boston for prediction standpoint, because as an underdog, you're going to get better odds there. But to me, if you're undecided on the series, I would actually, whichever side you want to go with, I actually like the prop bet of either Boston in 7 or Carolina in 7. You're going to get obviously plus money on that. But the issue is that what you can also do is that you can when you have the score of it, because Carolina in 7 is plus 450, Boston in 7 is plus 550. That should tell you something in terms of how close they think this series is, because even with some of these scores, the difference between closing out in 6 and closing out in 7 is minuscule. Boston in 6 is plus 425. Carolina in 6 is plus 550. Vegas is just telling you that they expect this series to go 6 or 7. That's where you're not getting that much different in terms of the odds, just because they're too evenly matched. It's going to be one of my more entertaining series to watch, just because I think this is a very closely matched lineup. And, even without Dougie Hamilton on the defensive side for Carolina, Tony DeAngelo has slid in there and done an admirable job. I think that, you're looking at Charlie McAvoy on the Bruins side for the defense. And, they've made some acquisitions with Hampus Lindholm. I just kind of look at it as it's enough where I think Boston has just enough in the tank. It's going to be really tight. And that's the truth of the matter. I think that series is the tightest one to call. So we'll see. But I'm going to be most interested in that series to see who ends up coming out with the W. Moving on back to the West, we've got the Edmonton Oilers playing the LA Kings. Listen, this comes down to Connor McDavid and and Leon Draisaitl. That's the series. If McDavid and Draisaitl score, Edmonton's winning this series. If they don't score, LA's probably winning this series. LA doesn't score either. They're right at, or I should say, right down there with Dallas in terms of least amount of goals scored. But they clamp down on you defensively, and they force you to beat them. So realistically, the more they are going to be under the knife. Philip Denault and Andrei Kopitar have been two of the better defensive centermen in the league this year. And again, Andrei Kopitar was once known, we talk about him being this offensive threat. And Kopitar's real point this year was basically locking down team's best line of defense. He's been playing a more defensive game. So Kopitar is 60-point centerman, but like his defense was on point. If you were watching the Kings games, and I know it was late on the West Coast for some of you, but he's changed up his game over the last 5-6 years to be more defensive minded. And he could still score. It's not like he's like lost his scoring touch. It's just that he's not made it that big of a priority anymore, where you were so used to him over 8 years ago, just running, just trucking dudes throughout the postseason play. And just like teams just being outright afraid of playing Kopitar. He's not playing that bruising style anymore, but he is still playing smart, locking down teams defensively. And Philip Deneau, one of the reasons why the Montreal made their run in the postseason last year, has been stellar again. I'm annoyed because I always said if the Rangers had signed Deneau instead of Gaudreau, the Rangers would be Cup favorites this year. But Deneau did exactly what the Kings needed him to do. They needed that second centerman to have two lockdown lines and make life easier for that entire squad just to play around goaltending. And Jonathan Quick was healthy enough this year to play well enough to get them back in the postseason. Like, that's really what this came down to in terms of matchups. Now, I got to look at this from the standpoint of, McDavid had 123 points. Draisaitl had 110. Draisaitl is like the first dude since Jágr in, I saw the stat, now I'm forgetting it. Like, Jágr did this year, like this, we're going back 95, 96, but 55 goals and 55 assists. Like, you just don't get that with centerman, and Draisaitl just had an incredible year. Now, again, Draisaitl and McDavid have had the primes of their careers completely wasted by Oilers management, just not assembling halfway decent squads to build around the team. But it's just a reality situation. If we're being honest with ourselves here, the Oilers do not have nearly enough depth to make it to make deep runs in the postseason, in my opinion. I think the Oilers lose to Calgary in the next round. And even so, I think this is another deep playoff series. People are expecting the Oilers to close this out in 6 games at the latest. Even 5, I've seen some predictions. If you're watching the Canadian broadcast on Sportsnet, I've seen some Oilers in 5 predictions. But I just think this is an awkward matchup for Edmonton in the fact that LA's just going to slow the game down and force McDavid and Draisaitl to score in tight quarters. And the thing is, Edmonton loves open ice. They're not going to get that in this series. I think this is a weird series for Edmonton. They could lose this series, and I want to be shocked. I know other people will be shocked. I am not one of those people. I think LA can make this one of those dirty, ugly series that they don't like playing, and they could drop the series. So I think Edmonton in 7, but man, I don't feel confident in that pick at all. I think the Kings can win this series, and everyone's looking past them. I just think it's a mistake. And then one matchup I did not talk about, Minnesota playing St. Louis. Minnesota favored? Don't necessarily know why. I would always give the backing to the Blues. The Blues have so much scoring depth. And yes, I know Kirill Kaprizov is a beast for Minnesota. But someone needs to explain to me how a team that scored more goals in the regular season than Minnesota has the better goaltender in Binnington. Yes, I know we all like Marc-Andre Fleury, But even in 2022, I'm taking Bennington over Marc-Andre Fleury. It's as much as I like Fleury, in 2022, I'm still taking Bennington. Minnesota gave up more goals, scored fewer goals, has the worst. They have a worse power play compared to the Blues. The Blues have a better penalty kill. Like, the Blues are demonstrably a better team. The Wild only finished 2 points ahead of them in the regular season because the Blues had some really cold stretches in the second half of the year, but have been back on track. I don't see how people are picking Minnesota to win this series. I think Minnesota should be the underdog. I just, I think the Blues could actually make it back to the Cup. The weird part is, I think how many people are downplaying the Blues this year. Tarasenko, and this is where it's kind of bizarre. Vladimir Tarasenko, who demanded a trade, I thought for sure Tarasenko was going to get traded. Blues stuck to their guns. Tarasenko leads the team in scoring with only 82 points, which, again, in a year where everyone scored, you're going to be saying, well, Dwayne, he only had 82 points. He only had 34 goals. Here's the issue with the Blues. Because of the Pavel Buchnevich trade by the Rangers, which they should have never made, the Blues had scoring throughout all three lines. So Tarasenko had a partner in Buchnevich who put up 30 and 46 for them. With Robert Thomas, that is the most lethal number two line in the playoffs, in my opinion. I know people are going to talk about Edmonton and a couple other squads. I think the Blues have the most undersold squad from a number two line standpoint in terms of forwards and defensemen. I think they can shut down teams. And the thing of it is that it's not even talking about their third line. Like, the Blues had so much scoring depth that when you're talking about Jordan Kyrou, put up 75 points being on the third line. The Blues had a ton of depth. They added Brandon Saad. I just look at it as like, this is just one of those awkward teams you don't want to be playing against in the postseason. Again, Minnesota had a very good regular season. I just think the Blues are a better team. I really think the Blues are a better team. And it's hard to like just discount a team that's won 53 games in a season, but I just, and it's a division rival too. So there's a lot of bitterness between both of these squads. I just think that between Husso and Bennington, I think both you're probably taking both goaltenders. The Blues will probably go with Husso to start, but I wouldn't be shocked if Bennington comes into the fold here if they find themselves down and needing a spark. I just think that if you're looking at these squads, the save percentages are better on the Blues side than even what you had with Fleury. And yes, I know some of Fleury's numbers are impacted by the Chicago team that he was stuck with. But even with that, I just think that the overall depth of the Blues is putting Minnesota in a very awkward spot. I just think the Blues have a better overall squad than Minnesota. Now, that doesn't mean that I think this series is a cakewalk, but I think if the Blues get up early in this series, the Blues can close them out faster than people expect. But I think that this is probably a series that's going 6, and I like the Blues. I just don't necessarily see Minnesota pulling that series out. I think the depth of the Blues gets past Minnesota, and I think for playoff challenge purposes, to get a little bit different, I think that the Blues are the exact same style team that's capable of knocking out a team like Colorado, and they could also beat a team like Calgary. I think the Blues are the dark horse team in the West that people have not been giving proper respect to. And if Minnesota actually pulls this off, don't get me wrong, if Minnesota pulls this off and they beat the Blues, I think Minnesota can go to the Stanley Cup final. Like, this is one of those weird series where someone's going to go home feeling very disappointed about how their season ended, because I think the winner of the series actually makes it to the Stanley Cup final in the West. I really do. I think these teams are good enough that if they can figure out a way to get past the other squad, they can make the run, because I just think that Colorado is there to be had. I don't think Colorado plays nearly disciplined enough. When you start factoring in a couple of these squads, that I think from a power play standpoint, Colorado is very dependent on it. Now, if it comes down to Minnesota, I think it's a much harder road for Minnesota. I'm sounding like trying to do my best Minnesota accent. I just think that for the Wild, it's a much harder act to take out Colorado. They have the game to do it. If they can beat the Blues, they'll have the game that they need to have in the playoffs to take out Colorado. But for the Blues, knowing what they need to do to grind out games, I think if they just get off to a good start against Minnesota, I think they carry it straight through against Colorado and get the win there. And I think once you get past Colorado, beating Calgary or Edmonton, it's the same formula. It's just easier to do than beating Colorado. Getting past Colorado is the key, but I think if you can get past Colorado, you have the game plan to beat Calgary and Edmonton. That's just, again, this is why I hate the bracket format, because realistically, you have to beat the best team in the second round. If you beat the best team in the second round, you're probably gonna go to the Stanley Cup final. But you have to beat the best team in the second round. And then our final game for this first round, I got to talk about my Rangers. Playing depends. I said this for months now. Rangers were going to make the playoffs, and they could either make the Stanley Cup final or get bounced in the first round. The Rangers, playing depends. I thought Pens, Capitals, realistically, it's a coin flip matchup. I would rather play the Capitals, but you got stuck with the Pens. Goaltending, Rangers win. Scoring wise, Rangers should win. But the bugaboo here is playoff format versus regular season format. Rangers were so dependent on the power play to score their goals. The Rangers had a 25% efficiency on the power play. The Pens are one of the most, actually, I think it was either in the Eastern Conference, at least, I think the Pens actually had the best penalty kill in the Eastern Conference this year. Even better than what you would normally expect out of Boston. I think it was actually I think it might have been Carolina. But I think between the Pens and Carolina, those were the two best penalty kill units in the league. But that's the thing. The Rangers' strength in the power play is almost negated by Pittsburgh killing off penalties, even when they do get into the box. Because that's the thing. Pittsburgh really doesn't get into the penalty box all that often. So the Rangers are going to have fewer opportunities than ever to generate power play opportunities. This is a very tricky series for the Rangers to navigate, because this is where I talk about the scoring depth not being there, because outside of the top six for the Rangers, they don't necessarily have that other option to go to, and that's why you needed a Buchnevich on the squad. Now, Andrew Kopp and Frank Vetrano have been very valuable down the stretch from their acquisition during the trade deadline. They've both played extremely well. The Rangers are gonna need that production to carry over into the postseason, because again, this is the question I had about the Rangers. Where are the additional scorers going to come from? Because once the power play gets shut down and everyone's keying in on Panarin, I expect everyone to do the same. Even though Panarin didn't have the most goals, he's going to be trying to tee up the likes of Kreider on the power play. He's going to be the one trying to get Ryan Strome into more open ice positions to set up other players. It's going to be a lot of mixing and matching with the Rangers offensively because, yes, we have the set pairings, but the guys getting focused on is like the Rangers are going to need Gaudreau to show up. Like, Gaudreau has to actually do some productive work on offense with pressure and getting some dirty goals. Like, the Rangers are going to have to scrap. I don't know if they have enough to get past the Pens, but there is no way I'm ever going to take the Pittsburgh Penguins with Crosby, Malkin, and Letang, and Gensel, and the whole scores of prospects that Pittsburgh keeps cranking out. There's no way I'm taking the Pens. There's no way I'm picking the Pens over the Rangers. I'm sorry. I'm a homer. So I'm going to take the Rangers in 6. It's probably going to be a wrong pick. And I'm probably going to take the Rangers to get to the conference finals against Tampa. And then I'll have them bow out from there. But it's the one pick where I look at it and I'm saying, if I was doing this objectively from an analysis standpoint, the Pens' ability to shut down power plays is going to be so critical in determining who wins this postseason matchup. I think the Rangers are going to have to figure out a way of solving the Penguins' penalty kill if they're going to get past and win this series. Shesterkin, I expect to play well, but Shesterkin is only going to steal a game or two. The Rangers got to figure out a way of winning 4 games, and part of that's going to end up involving the games they can get the power play going. If they can't get the power play going, the Pens probably win this series, as much as that annoys me, but that's where I see things lining up. But, if I'm picking teams to make the Stanley Cup final, I told you how much I like Tampa. I just think the market is so wrong on Tampa, and they've been looking past them. Tampa, I expect to beat Toronto. In a matchup against Florida versus Tampa, where people are going to pick Florida as the favorite, I'm going to take Tampa again. They have the experience. Florida's not afraid of them, but Tampa, knowing what's on the line here, I expect them to lock in, be focused, and Vasilevsky to shine as usual to get past Florida. And from there on, they're in, as much as I like the Rangers, even if it's Boston or Carolina, like, again, I don't see the teams in the bottom half of the Eastern Conference bracket taking out Tampa if Tampa can get past Florida. I just don't see it. And as on the other side, I explained to you guys, if St. Louis gets out of the first round and plays their game, they should be in fine form to make it all the way to the Stanley Cup final. So I'm going to pick a final of St. Louis versus Tampa, and I'm taking Tampa to win the Stanley Cup. We shall see how it all lines up, but I think we have a real chance at a three-peat here. And, from an odds standpoint, if you're looking at the betting odds of who's going to win the Cup, Tampa Bay is 11-1. They have the same odds as Carolina. You've got a chance at a three-peat with a team that relatively has come back in most of the roster from the previous 2 Cup runs. I just look at it as, it's just a case where this is just lining back up. It's like it screams three-peat, but it's like, could you imagine a series where Tampa has a chance at a three-peat and the last team left standing in their way is the previous Cup champion from 2019 in St. Louis? I think that's a hell of a series. I think the NHL would be happy if they got that series finale. I know that they probably would want Tampa versus Colorado or Edmonton, but I don't think that's the worst case scenario either from a matchup standpoint. TV ratings wise, yeah, it makes a difference. It definitely makes a difference. But we'll leave it at that. So that's all I have for NHL talk. Again, I keep seeing I keep seeing folks getting upset at the takes against Kyrie Irving. I'm sorry. Everyone keeps getting upset with the amount of complaints being leveled at Kyrie Irving, saying it's unfair. Kyrie Irving was not in shape for that postseason matchup against the Celtics. If you think Kyrie Irving was in playing shape, was in true playoff shape, I don't know what games you were watching, but he was pretty much not in shape, got swept as a 6-1 favorite to win the NBA title. It was a stupid bet. I kept telling folks it was a stupid bet, but guys, Kyrie Irving deserves to get blasted. It's simple as that. You didn't produce. You made the entire season about you. Yes, you actually need to be called out on the carpet. Like, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. So that's all there is to it. Like, you guys can be upset that it's hating or whatever term you want to throw out there. It's just the reality of the situation. So, I hope that's the last thing I have to talk about with Kyrie Irving, because it's just the amount of people who are trying to defend Kyrie Irving for not doing his job and not being professional. I just find it absolutely absurd. But anyway, that's all I got for today. Enjoy the Stanley Cup playoffs, folks. I know I will. So until next time, have a good one, and we will talk some more sports down the pipe. Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Fantasy Throwdown Podcast. Be sure to like and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and all other major outlets.